In the quiet town of Willowbrook, where secrets festered just below the surface, a dark story unraveled. A story of forbidden love, betrayal, and an unthinkable end. Elena and Michael seemed like the perfect couple. To outsiders, their life together was charmed. They had a lovely home, 2 children, and a marriage that appeared secure. Michael's father, Richard, a rugged man with a dark charisma, often visited their home, casting a looming presence over the family. He was a retired detective, respected in the community for his tough approach to justice. But beneath his veneer of virtue, Richard harbored a secret passion. This passion was Elena. It began innocently enough. A comforting hand, an intimate glance shared over a quiet dinner, a lingering touch when no one was watching. But what should have been nothing more than passing moments of connection soon bloomed into a torrid affair. They would meet secretly in hidden places, whispering their plans and stealing forbidden moments. However, guilt soon weighed on Elena's heart. She began to pull away, hoping to end things before they spun further out of control. Richard, however, would not let her go so easily. Obsessed and possessive, he began to press Elena, hinting that he might reveal everything if she did not continue to see him. Fearing her life would be torn apart, she succumbed to his demands but began secretly planning her escape. One night, the unthinkable happened. Michael returned home early from a business trip, only to find his father's car in the driveway. Confused and concerned, he entered the house, calling out to Elena. Silence answered him. He made his way to their bedroom, where a sliver of light shone under the door. What he saw when he opened that door was a sight he would never forget. There, in his own bed, lay Elena and his father, locked in a passionate embrace. The silence that followed was dense with the weight of what was unfolding. A single whispered Michael escaped Elena's lips, but it was too late. Rage overtook him, a blinding fury that silenced any coherent thought. Without a word, Michael stormed to the garage, returning with a metal crowbar. Richard leapt from the bed trying to plead, but Michael's anger knew no restraint. Blow after blow fell upon his father. The sound of metal hitting flesh filled the room, each impact echoing with years of betrayal and hurt. Elena screamed, begging him to stop, but Michael was beyond reason. When Richard finally lay lifeless, Michael turned to Elena, his gaze haunted. The very woman he had loved, who had once been his everything, had conspired with his own blood. In a fit of despair, Michael staggered out of the house, leaving a scene of horror in his wake. The next morning, the police found him wandering by the riverbank, his clothes stained in blood, his hands trembling. When they asked him what had happened, he merely muttered, "They took everything. They took my heart." The scandal erupted, casting a dark shadow over Willowbrook. The perfect family had been torn apart by a tragic betrayal that had festered in secret, leading to a crime that could never be undone. Elena, broken and abandoned, lived on, bearing the weight of her sins. Michael, sentenced for manslaughter, lived out his days behind bars, haunted by the memories of the family he once cherished. And as for Richard, the once respected man who held justice in his hands, his grave became a cold reminder of what betrayal could do, a warning of how love, when corrupted, could end only in blood. As time wore on, the once idyllic town of Willowbrook struggled to move past the tragedy that had shattered its tranquil facade. Yet, the story of betrayal and bloodshed had left scars that ran far deeper than anyone realized. Elena remained in Willowbrook, an outcast haunted by both memory and rumor. Some said they saw her wandering the town at night, cloaked in shadows, as if she could hide from her shame. Though she had avoided prison, her punishment was her isolation. Friends turned away, and neighbors whispered whenever she passed. Even her children, left in the care of Michael's sister, refused to see her, believing she was the reason their father was behind bars. Desperate and alone, Elena became a shell of the vibrant woman she had once been. But what no one knew was that Elena had her own secret burden to carry, one that twisted the story even further into darkness. Not long after Michael's incarceration, she began to receive anonymous letters. Short, cryptic messages, each one more chilling than the last. "A man you trusted. A life destroyed. You thought it was over?" The words, written in a jagged slanting script, seemed to taunt her, reminding her of the choice that had led to her downfall. The letters had no return address, but the scent of stale tobacco lingered on the paper. At first, she dismissed them as some cruel prank from a scornful neighbor, but with each new letter, Elena's nerves began to fray. She started sleeping with the lights on, flinching at every shadow that passed her window. One evening, after months of silence, she received another note, this one more ominous than the rest. "There are debts still unpaid. I'll see you soon." Fear gnawed at her, and her mind spun with possibilities. The words, "I'll see you soon," haunted her thoughts. Was it someone who knew the truth? Or perhaps a twisted admirer, fixated on her tragedy? The desperation mounted until, finally, she reached out to the only person who could help, Detective Sarah Whitman, a former colleague of Richard's and a friend of the family. Sarah, a seasoned detective, had always sensed something was off about the case. Though Michael was behind bars, and the evidence had aligned, she believed there were secrets yet untold. When Elena explained the letters, Sarah's suspicions flared. Together, they decided to conduct a silent investigation, one that would remain hidden from the prying eyes of the town. Days passed with no new developments, and Elena began to doubt her own sanity, wondering if the letters had all been some figment of her guilt. But one night, she heard a creak outside her bedroom window. Her breath caught, and her pulse raced as she reached for her phone. Peering through the curtains, she saw a shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably familiar. In the dim glow of the porch light, there was no mistaking the figure who stood outside. It was Michael. She froze, watching as he remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the house. This couldn't be possible. Michael was still incarcerated. She had been receiving updates on his case, his sentence, his appeals. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years. But there he was, standing on her front lawn like a specter. Elena managed to call Sarah, who arrived swiftly, her weapon drawn, her instincts sharp. But by the time she reached the property, the figure had disappeared, leaving only faint tracks in the damp earth. In the days that followed, Elena convinced herself that she had been dreaming, that grief and regret had played tricks on her mind. But Sarah knew better. Digging into prison records, Sarah found something startling. Michael had been granted a temporary furlough for a psychiatric evaluation, which for reasons unknown, had never been reported to Elena or any family members. But more disturbing still was the note found in Michael's prison cell after his release. She took my heart. Now I will take hers. The pieces began to fall into place. In his tortured mind, Michael blamed Elena not only for his crime but for the life he had lost, the family, the reputation, the freedom. And he was determined to make her pay. The furlough had been his only chance to confront her, but he had done more than that. He had left her with one last, chilling reminder of his presence. One evening, as Elena sat alone, nursing a glass of wine, her front door creaked open. She turned, heart pounding, and there stood Michael, his face twisted with a mixture of pain and fury, a specter of the man he once was. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. There would be no redemption, no forgiveness. Elena backed away, her hand reaching instinctively for her phone. But Michael moved faster, seizing her arm and forcing her to face him. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but filled with an intensity that made her blood run cold. I gave you everything, Elena. My love, my trust, and you gave me nothing but betrayal. Do you even know what you took from me? The confrontation that followed was brief but brutal, words exchanged like weapons, each one cutting deeper than the last. In that final encounter, Michael's rage found release. But Elena, resilient in her survival instincts, fought back, and in a desperate struggle, she managed to break free, fleeing from the house and into the night. When Sarah arrived with reinforcements, she found Michael alone in the house, a man undone by his own torment, surrendering to the police without a struggle. As they led him away, Willowbrook knew it would never forget this tragic saga, a story that had begun with passion but ended with ruin. Willowbrook thought it had witnessed the end of a tragic tale, but the ripples from Elena and Michael's forbidden secrets and violence refused to settle. Michael was returned to prison, but this time under closer watch, stripped of any remaining chance for furlough or appeal. Broken and empty, he drifted into silence, as though his spirit had finally fractured beyond repair. Elena, however, bore the brunt of public scorn. Despite her plea to escape the tragedy's aftermath, she found herself endlessly haunted, not just by memories but by whispers, faces, and guilt that clung to her like shadows. Michael's threat, "I'll take your heart," echoed in her mind, relentless and taunting, as if his ghost lived in her very thoughts. She no longer felt safe, even in her own home. The nightmares had become part of her nights. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the window, felt like his presence. Desperate to find some form of closure, she decided to visit him one last time. The prison walls felt cold and heavy as she waited in the visitor's room, her hands clenched in her lap. When Michael finally entered, his once piercing eyes were dulled, his frame slumped. She barely recognized him. The man who had once loved her, who had taken her father-in-law's life in a blinding fury, had been replaced by someone hollow. Elena could barely whisper as she asked, "Why did you come back that night? Why couldn't you let me go?" For a long moment, he looked at her, his face a mask of bitterness and sorrow. "Because, Elena, you were my heart. And when you gave it away, you took everything from me." In that instant, she understood his devastation, felt the terrible weight of his love turn to hate, his anguish twisted into vengeance. But nothing else was said. Michael left, his silence echoing in her mind long after he had gone, and she knew this would be the last time they would ever see each other. When Elena returned home, she felt as though a chapter had truly closed. Yet her final confrontation with Michael left her unsettled, a part of her clinging to the past, haunted by its shadows. She could no longer stay in Willowbrook, a town whose streets were thick with memories that would never fade. With a heavy heart, she sold the house and left Willowbrook for good. She drifted through several cities, unable to find peace. In her new, anonymous life, she tried to blend into the crowd, hoping to bury the haunting memories and reclaim some sliver of normalcy. Yet wherever she went, rumors followed, as if some unseen force tied her forever to the tragedy. The guilt and betrayal continued to weigh on her, a ghostly tether she could not escape. Years passed, and Elena grew older, her life a quiet existence tinged with remorse and loneliness. And one evening, as she sat alone by a window in her modest apartment, she received a final, unexpected letter, one that was, this time, addressed to her children. The letter was from Michael, written with a hand unsteady but determined. In it, he confessed to his children the truth of his actions, his descent into jealousy, the betrayal he could not forgive. He detailed his own shame and regret, urging his children to never make the same mistakes he had made, to learn from the love that had gone so horribly wrong. He ended the letter with a haunting line that left Elena breathless. "Remember that love is not ownership. And hate only leaves you empty." Elena sat with the letter in her hands, staring at the words until they blurred before her eyes. At last, she knew that this was the closest to an apology that she or anyone would ever receive. In those final words, Michael had left her with the only peace he could offer, a lesson in love, betrayal, and the consequences of unchecked obsession. And with that letter, Elena finally found the strength to forgive herself. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift, like a ghost finally released from the chains of her own making. In the end, the story of Elena and Michael became a distant memory, a whispered warning in the town of Willowbrook, a reminder of the dangers hidden within love and betrayal. Willowbrook itself moved on, its secrets buried under layers of time, while Elena, now free from the ghosts of her past, spent her remaining years in solitude, a woman who had faced the darkness within and emerged, finally, into light.